Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ. Thank you for being in the hood today, this morning. I'm glad all of you could be here, especially those who can join live, who are my co hosts today. We are continuing our talk, um, one part uh historic retrospective, another part compare and contrast, maybe a little dash of wishful thinking, and all that good stuff. Anyway, we're talking about the OSR versus Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or maybe we could just maybe generally call it modern day gaming. And I thought we could talk about some of the unintended consequences of the changes throughout the ages, and why maybe we have some conflict with what the game is today, and some of the reasons how gaming has changed quite a bit from then till now. And again, the unintended consequence of creating a community that is growing now and has basically reached national, if not international, attention because of the very unique relationship we as gamers have with our gaming community. It's there are very few, if any, businesses where we have the right to create content using the rules that were created for it, and eventually, aspirationally, those of us playing, classically playing together, rolling some dice in our basements, becoming creatives, if not executive members of a board that creates this hobby with us. So today we are going to continue our conversation with one that we had yesterday, and I thought I'd talk about. I started out with something pretty simple: gold, experience points, encumbrance. But today we're going to talk about uh, what I think is the link from classic treasure tropes, going into dungeons and defeating what we perceive as the big bads and the evils, and taking their stuff, especially their magic items and treasures and things. We're going to talk a little bit about equipment as well. And until today, where primarily, magic items have not just are not just secondary, but I think there's even groups where magic items are extremely rare, to the point that we have forums and gaming groups that kind of have to figure out, like, how many, if any, magic items a group gets when they achieve higher levels, and the balancing issues that it deals with when it comes to those. I I know you guys see that there's the ring light that's really reflecting my glasses, but I'm not going to worry about that. That's those are for professionals, and I'm not a professional broadcaster. Um, so allow me to uh, present my case to the judges, and you guys decide on this. Um, mm, mm, mm. Oh yeah. All right. So J Dub says, and I can't disagree with this. All right. When Lorraine Williams usurped TSR in an attempt to sell a gazillion books, she flooded the market with the quote complete race and class guide books, of which I have all of them digitally. And too many options have been a problem ever since. And this is a huge problem when it comes to um, sales of anything, to be honest with you, and more so in our hobby than a little bit. And that is the division between giving people what they want and giving people what they need. And unfortunately, the sexy thing is to give people what they want, to give people players more options, more capabilities, more powers. It's the new sexy. And the reason for that is because, as has been brought to light today, and I'm sure this has been a discussion throughout the history of Dungeons and Dragons and other um, um, gaming companies, and that is selling things to dungeon masters, or narrators, storytellers, whatever you want to call them, game masters, while useful because it's what the game needs. You need people to run the games 5 times as many other individuals, the players that play the game are not being monetized. They are not buying the books. Now that's from their point of view. That's from their loftiness. I cannot um uh fight the will it show up completely? Yeah, most of the comment. Yeah, I can't argue with J Dub's comment about ever since Lorraine Williams and a gazillion books. And to be honest with you, this was a newish time in the industry, and if players purchased those books, they were making a lot of money. But if you think about it, it also was their downfall, right? That's when people started to silo things. And even today, they're talking about the fact that we have a dungeon master deficit today. And one of the reasons is because by giving out so many options and doing so many things, it's the siloing effect has made it difficult for dungeon masters to run games. Essentially, they have to start games out by saying no, and that's not a good foot to start out on. All right, our co-hosts say Zamara says technically D&D have reached international interest. It's very commonly used in Japan, first and second edition, and 5e, India for fifth edition, and Britain all editions. There are other places, but yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's in. Um, I really want to talk about an Italian game that I came across. It has a free SRD and stuff. I want to talk about it so bad. But yeah, yeah. Internationally, yeah, these games are bold, and I would dare say, while the United States is the biggest market, there are other smaller markets I think that are far more energized. I think would be organized. I don't know. I'm not using the right terminology. Mike says, watching older swords and sorcery movies from the 80s, there might be a magic item that multiple groups are after. Talk about the magic items thing, my dissertation. Old codger opinion. Okay. Players need more imagination. Ooh, burn. Here we go. Modern writer opinion, players need better tools or allowances to invoke that imagination. I like that. I like that. I like that a lot. I think it's so difficult to I'm going to use the word sandbox. I'm probably using it incorrectly in terms of our community, but it's so difficult to throw enough tools and toys into the sandbox to get players to use it without railroading them and telling them exactly how to use the shovel and the dump truck and the bucket and you know what I mean? It's really weird. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, how I don't want to butcher his name. Sindre Flatland. D&D has never really done scarcity of magic items in any setting, have they? Oh yeah, yeah. Dark Sun is one, and Greyhawk kind of a little bit. Mike says, unpopular opinion: the lack of DMing isn't about too many options; it's about the perception of labor. Okay. Uh, it's about the perception of labor. It's too hard. There are too many rules. I can't do voices, none of which is true. I think that has a lot. I think that adds to the problem in terms of, well, I have to learn the rules. The rules are too complicated. That's always been an issue. But once you start adding in things like I'm going to be compared to the best that are out there, and you actually have audio and visual evidence of it that didn't exist before when we were in basements, with beer and pretzels, basically, or younger than that, juice boxes and pretzels and stuff. Now we actually had something to compare it to, but that's good and bad. Social media and YouTube technically is a social media platform. Twitch is as well. Now that we have video evidence of it, yeah, it's like I can't do that one. Flatlands, I'll give that one to you. Dark Sun tries to emulate Sid Sword and Sorcery movies, so no surprise there. So I think let me lay out, allow me to lay out what I think has happened, along with the power creep and that kind of thing. So a difficult position for any gaming company is to offer new things for people to purchase and new opportunities for adventure if you just for the creative side of the company. And what we have here is in Dungeons and Dragons is there's only so many doors you can kick in, defeat the evil, and take their stuff until we have to go down other pathways. Now, during this time, there were other options. You can go more philosophical or social or explorative in terms of creating more challenges. But at the end of those challenges, there are rewards. And although those rewards may seem very minor, there is a thing called the gambler's high. And in reality, and the gambler's high is if you lose too many times, you want to keep gambling through the losses to get a win. And if you win, you want to keep gambling through the wins because you're lucky now, your luck can still hold on. And in gaming, there is a little bit of that gambler's high. There's a bit of the man, I'm defeating all the creatures and monsters and adventuring. I want to keep this, I want to feel this dopamine hit more and more. And then the losses, man, our characters aren't powerful enough, but if we just keep going, we don't want to give up now. We want to keep moving ahead and ahead until we achieve some kind of reward. And one of the easiest ways for a reward was a magic item. Now, in an OSR, uh, character character class capabilities, except for the cleric and the wizard, which were very low in the very beginning levels and started to do like um, a sharp increase as the levels moved on, especially when you got to double digits. Most characters didn't have a lot of capabilities. So what happened was characters would outfit themselves with a lot of different pieces of equipment. Those who've played any kind of OSR games will understand this. You always went out, uh, other than henchmen or anything like that. You carried in your pack. You had ball bearings, sand or salt. You had a couple of chickens. You had a 10-foot pole. You had pitons or pythons or basically things you would knock for climbing that you hammer so you could use those to wrap rope around the climb. You would use them to wedge doors open or closed. There were so many little things, magnets and pieces of cotton. I mean, we carried around with us so many little types of mundane equipment with us. And if you were OSR, you understood why you had these things. You would pour ball bearings on a room to see if it sloped. You would have sand or dust or something like that to test for air currents. You'd have feathers. You had the chickens and the goats and things to push down the hallways to trigger the traps and stuff. I mean, it was we were madcap when it came to those kind of things. And pretty interested when it came to mundane equipment, which is where the 10-foot pole idea came from. Because when back before 5-foot squares, there was a generality to have 10-foot squares on a grid. The blue inked grid paper, and you would take your 10-foot pole and start poking and prodding ceilings and walls and floors for all the traps and all the. I mean, it was a whole thing. It was a big mess. And magic items that were found throughout dungeons kind of told a story. So, of course, you came across potions of healing, maybe a scroll or two, but along the way, you would find items, and you may not necessarily understand what they were for, but there was a glut of magic items in old school Dungeons and Dragons, many of which were not only dangerous, not cursed, but dangerous, as well as having weird, funky properties. So, for example, if you, uh, yeah, Mike's like never left town without flasks of oil for oozes. Yep, because you got to burn them or whatever, scare them away. Yeah, 10-foot poles for pits, torches for light, multiple weeks food because we get trapped somewhere. That was a big thing. And I see your. Don't worry, co-host. I see your comments ahead. Um, we'll get back into that, but I just want to state that magic items in some ways told a story of the dungeon. So if you found, I have to pull something out of my ass. If you found a helm of water breathing in a dry dungeon, it it was a hint that there's going to be something ahead. You don't know what, whether it's a flooded chamber or an aquifer that's going to end up, spilling water down into the deepest parts of the dungeon, or you would go so down so far you'd find like an underwater ocean or something like that, a lake, or I don't know, an elemental from the plane of water. Like there would be something in there, and it would tell a little bit of the story of the progress that you were making. So if you found a magic item dealing with dragons, you knew in this adventure or further on, you were going to encounter dragons. If you found silvered weapons, you knew you were going to it's werewolves or something coming up. A holy item that was useful for the the cleric or something, as well as magic items that were a lot of the magic items beyond weapons and armor had were very utilitarian. I remember there was a rod. I remember there was a rod that you could command that would not move. So you could throw it in the air, command it, and it was immovable. I think the rod was even called like the immovable rod. I don't know. I know you guys know the names of all the magic items. I just remember what they were used for. But there were figurines of wondrous power that would change into various types of animals you could command. There was a robe of pockets that had these pockets, and you would just reach into a pocket and pull weird things like weasels and nails and a lit torch or a campfire. There were feathers, qualls, feather tokens, if I remember them, and they were one-use items that were feathers. Like I throw a feather down to make a tree. I throw a feather down to make a ladder or a piece of rope. I throw a feather down and it brings summons three henchmen that last for 24 hours or something. There were a lot of these small magic items, and characters weren't defined by their capabilities. They were almost defined by the items they carried. A cloak of the bat, which was a really cool magic item, or a armor of invulnerability, or here's a classic one: the a flame tongue sword or a frost brand sword, which were two of the most iconic magic items in the game. Those magic items have kind of fallen away because as time has gone on, magic item distribution was always chaotic. There was no specified method and manner of how many items you got, when and if you got them, and navigating the world. And so, because there wasn't a specified way to do it, the easiest way to specify characters progressing at the same level was to add more capabilities built into character progression, which became class abilities. And now it's gotten to the point it in the beginning it was class abilities that were, I'm going to call them mundane. You could climb, swim, jump better or more efficiently, move silently, better, especially for like the rogue and ranger type classes. Fighters got to hit things just a little bit harder. Clerics had a little bit more healing, the ability to repel more or have more options to repel some of the monsters. But over time it became a lot more magical related. Characters had the ability to, punch, kick, and defeat things that were five times their size. And now character classes start out with primarily like 90% of the character classes start out with some kind of magical ability, and it just gets uh worse for wear from there. And I think what ends up happening now is the more capabilities a character class has, the less they need the imperative to go out and find those things to defeat the next big bad. You wanted to go on a quest to get a flame tongue sword because the next time you fought a hydra or a troll, it was easier. Now, if you could just if you're I don't know coming up with something, if you're average druid or monk or even barbarian can create fire in the palm of their hand, there's no need to go after that sword any longer. Let me get back into our co-host because you're saying a lot. John Dove says the old school TSR Conan and Red Sonja settings were pretty limited on the cleric and magic user side. That's another thing that I feel is creates conflict in Dungeons and Dragons, is because when you want to have that sword and sorcery, sword and sandals kind of feel, limited magic, you end up having to tell your players no a lot more than saying yes, because you have to delete it out of the game, and that's a terrible way to start. Terrible way to start. Yeah, Dead Man brings up Dragonlance. It says also limited clerics during most of the setting's history. Mm. Um, Sindre says, counterclaim. Modern gamers seem more story focused, and they don't so much mourn the character death as they mourn the stop to said character's storyline. And I like the way you put that, because there is a difference between a very simple way of saying something is character. You hear this a lot. Character death. It's important for there to be character death in order to bring the lethality of the game up higher. And I would argue, kind of what Flatland is saying here, is that it's not character death; it's the inability to progress your character forward. And I know it sounds like two separate things, but they're the same thing. A character that's dead has no more story, but a character that can't progress is exactly the same way. And there are games where you can't die. They're playing role playing games, indie games. I guess you could call them indie games. One of them is Tales from the Loop. It's a kids game. I'm sorry, it's a game where you play kids. It's not a kids game. But Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood, your character can't die. You're a kid. You are a preteen or a teenager, but there are mechanisms in the game where you cannot progress any further. Your parents move away. You're grounded for life. You're put in juvie, right? It's exactly character death. It's just not using the same word. It's um, semantics is a big thing in role playing games, and a character that can't die can still be prevented from progressing in stories. And I agree with you that today a lot of the people who are producing role playing game entertainment, Critical Role and beyond, are trying to make more storylines, and it's in conflict with the way the rules are today. I have to agree. Druden says basically people played back in the day just some grave robbers, while these days now are about playing heroes. And it has progressed to that point where the simplicity of adventures back in the day was you're in a small town or village, player characters are the only ones brave enough to stop a problem, fix the problem outside the town. There really wasn't plots weren't a thing. It was there's stuff outside the city, you need to go poke and prod it. And that was about the only reason to go outside. And it was a good enough. There weren't storylines about you know, ancient wars and our characters are ancestors, you know, eight times removed from a demon lord and all that. It wasn't any of that. We were just farmers plus who just so happened to be able to fight or were braver than the average person in town, and we went outside the town and would encounter things, and the story was emergent. So it wasn't a pre-planned storyline to tell about my relationship with my siblings over the years. No, it was walk outside into the danger and see what happens, and then the story was told after that. Yep. Like brings up the immovable rod. Yeah, I love that magic item, and so many others. Mm-mm. Yeah, Michaels also brings up OSR dungeons inspired Zelda in that quote, "You get what you need later" way. It very much was that. There were a lot of magic items that, like, okay, there was a ointment. No, no, no. It was a glue. It was a forever bonding glue, and you're just like scratching your head. It was like an immovable paste or irremovable paste, and then there was another one that allowed the paste to be removed, but you had to find that. And it's like, well, what was the purpose of that? Like, why do you need glue, or why would you need oil of slipperiness, or it's so many other really strange, odd, like one shot potion scrolls were a big thing. Rods that did very odd had very odd non mechanically defined abilities, right? Like the rod of immovability, it didn't have a mechanical feature to it that was explainable. It was a rod that you could command and it would be immovable. But what would you use it for? Would you throw it towards a pit and stop it in the middle and swing from it? Would you place it against a door and command it so the door could never be wedged open or something? Like there wasn't a die roll involved in a lot of these magic items. And as players wanted definitions for things you could do, and dungeon masters were being challenged about the rulings, more rules came about, and those rules then meant that you had to codify them. How far can you jump? How much damage does lighting things on fire do? Those kind of things. And I think as more of the capabilities became um, went from external to internal into the player characters, we had to come up with, well, when I say we, the community and game designers had to come up with reasons like, well, wait a minute, if the character has all this power inside of them, then what's the purpose of them adventuring? Well, now we're going to have to go towards storylines. Now we're going to have to uh, uncover histories that were not told before. Maybe we're going to have to be more investigators of a plot rather than emergent storytellers where none of us know what the story is, both players and dungeon master, until the dice start rolling. And then after the fact, we are like, oh man, wasn't it cool when you know Grognar slid down the thing and Ariana slid down after him and caught his hand just before he fell into the spiked pit? Wasn't that cool? And everyone's like, yeah, man, I really love that part. Whereas now it feels like they want dungeon masters to be writers and plot generators and go, okay, well, something out there in the unknown belongs to you specifically, or is related to you, or because of the guilt you felt by leaving, I don't know, the cult or something like that, and leaving your loved ones behind. Now you have to figure, and it becomes far more storyline oriented, and there aren't very many rules to do that. Um, Guys talking to each other. J Dub says, if you always have the perfect weapon, spell, or item to deal with problems, you guys always have always have the excellent things. Anyway, J Dub says, if you always have the perfect weapon, spell, or item to deal with the problems, things are more simple and a tad boring. But when you're limited in resources, you're forced to be a creative MacGyver to MacGyver to cope. You know what? I needs to be it, that's a quote that needs to be placed on a T-shirt somewhere, because um, the ball bearings, the bag of sand, the dust, the strips of cloth, the small bits of oil, the I, all these other little things. I see your comment there, Zamar. All these things were intended to be creative. The 10-foot pole, to be honest with you, inadvertently became the OSR item of choice, right? I mean, the 10-foot pole only came about because of pits and traps and things falling from the ceiling and the javelins, shooting across the hallway and all that. And when you start walking down these 10-foot hallways, you needed something to poke and prod, and the 10-foot pole became iconic because of that. But hey, 50 foot of rope wasn't far behind, you know. It was about being creative, and there were no rules for these things. If you had a bag of ball bearings, there weren't rules how to use it. The dungeon master had to be creative when the player's like, well, I throw the ball bearings down the hallway, what happens? And the dungeon master had to think and go, wow, okay, let's see, the hallway does slope, and or there's a trap that makes the the hall tilt to have them fall. Would is the war is the floor warped, or is it perfectly flat? You're like, no, I'm gonna give it to them. Yeah, yeah, the ball bearings all roll to the other end of the hallway as if it slopes, and the PCs are like, aha, all right, let's look around for something. There weren't any codified rules. Okay, okay. Um, mm, mm, You guys are having a conversation amongst you. Okay, Zamara says something I want to mention. A change in addition leads to a possible reset in the world that has happened. There are four ways that can go. The first two are more or less powerful characters. Usually, a system will tend towards more powerful initial starts, since if you did your job well in previous editions, uh, the players would be the players would be used to more powerful PCs. Okay. Um, Rarely, though, they would make your character start weaker in order to allow for more options later on in play. That's true, or more unique play options. But power creep would still be more common. The second two are in the special options themselves. Third edition is a great example of this one, as well as the proliferation of magic in the end of second edition. I'm currently trying to convert all of the 2E magic spells to 5E, and 2E has a stupid amount of magic redundancy, which honestly is fixed in 5E by an overcasting system or the sheer array of race or class options and combinations in third edition. For 5E, I think it has quite a bit of more pre-made magic items than in second edition, but that I haven't counted. But either way, that's power creep too. It sure is. Anyway, that is my Zamara 0292 trademark, short from Forum Rant today. Uh, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Don't forget to. Yeah. Okay, so what and what Z is basically mentioning is that like essentially through all these iterations, we have had this idea that like um, simplifying, codifying. How many options are there today that are auto success? Never get things like never get lost, never surprised, automatically find food. So many other things that are auto successes, and passive auto successes basically eliminate any need for that challenge. So if you're never lost, there's no need to carry extra food in case you get lost. There's no need to roll on random charts that are going to put your that all the player characters know are going to put them in danger when they travel out into the unknown reaches of your game setting. Because if they're never going to get lost in your accursed desert, they're just going to make a beeline to the front door of the adventure. They'll never accidentally bump into a nomadic tribe of I don't know scorpion riders or um, yet another monolith that's out there just today uncovered because of the sandstorms and whatnot. There's none of that. All that stuff disappears. All those story opportunities, all those plot hooks, all of the challenges it takes to get back on track. The the missing tool today of tension and pressure and time completely disappears when nobody can be surprised. No one gets lost. No need to worry about food and whatnot. Uh, I mean, I told you guys like yesterday, we used to have these five goblins that would steal food from other players as they were traveling. And it's like, well, if you steal the food, it's not like it's going to hurt a party if they have somebody there that can easily create food and water, or purify food and water, or can automatically find food and water for their entire party. Then you just as a dungeon master, you're like, well, I guess there's no point in even adding that, and then that muscle atrophies. Mm, mm, mm. Let's see. Flatland says you guys were talking. Mm, uh, it's hard to find. Flatland is responding. I can't find the story. Okay. Anyway, there you go, Dead Man. Sovereign glue and universal solvent. The sovereign glue. That's it. He kept that. Uh, yeah. Z's mentions, gods, it's hard to keep. It's hard to keep your mind together when dealing with such a small character limit. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's why there and Z goes on to say, "Huh, I would challenge first edition D&D to get rid of all its auto successes, see where the player base goes from there." Oh, you mean one D&D. I'm sorry, not one, not first edition. One D&D to get rid of all its auto success to see where the player base goes from there. And see, unfortunately, today it's like you have to remove those things now, and that's hard. When you give people things, it's hard to take it back from them, even if it's for their own good. Um, you Mike and Flatland were kind of talking in the chat, going back and forth about this. I'm going to bring this to into a wider issue, and that is like it's about what we as dungeon masters, game masters, storytellers, narrators, and such, we need. Our tools are, we need as many options as possible to create challenges. It's not to punish players, which often that seems to be a thing. For a long time there was this idea of the killer DM, right? The killer game master who's like trying to kill the players. Today, no, what we really want is just challenges. For me, you guys know I'm the exploration guy, right? I'm like, I want rope bridges. I want complications. I want mudslides and forest fires and storms and like hurricanes or tornadoes. I want burning buildings and running across rooftops, or slinking through sewer systems and all. I want those things because I need as many tools as I can get to challenge my players. If it means a big pool of water and a glow on the other side, and the players have to decide, okay, I'm heavily armed and armored and laden with gear, and I've got to take it all off to hold my breath to swim from A to B. That's a great challenge, and we don't have a lot of rules for that, right? Numeric rules, and unfortunately, today we expect there to be some kind of numeric value attached to one-offs, whereas back in the OSR there were no rules, and so the lack of the rules was a challenge for the entire group. Like, okay, so how do we adjudicate this? Like, how do we really do this? And and it's a thing. It's a thing. uh, you guys are so funny. Mike says Z Bradshaw has a vid on Goodberry and its effect on survival themes. I don't know that name, but I'll look it up. Z Z Bashu? Yeah, Goodberry is horrible. What's the other one? Tiny Hut. Tiny Hut is so broken. And I understand why they created it, right? Like the Tiny Hut spell, the Goodberry spell, create food and water. I get what create food and water more has more biblical historical value in that. But you get the point, right? Like, and I think like create food and water was like a sixth level spell way back in the day. Um, Heck, I remember our group having arguments about the continual light spell back when continual light was a thing. Players would pick it and like cast continual light on anything they could touch. And as DMs, we were just like, oh man, okay. Well, no need for torches any longer. You guys are funny. All right, so um along with here's another unintended consequence of giving our players easy buttons. There's a commercial for Staples or Office Max or something where someone in the office has a big red button and they press the easy button because it says easy on it, and they press the button and then things just arrive at their doorstep. Another thing that happens unintentionally was the fact that um, along magic spells are the wizard used to be the only arbiter of magic spells, and it was a limited resource. Now, back in the day, magic, of course, was the easy button. If the wizard had the spell levitation, they didn't have, at least that one character or the one enchanted didn't have to use rope to scale I don't know, a shaft in the Underdark or something. They had levitation. But the controlling factor on that was wizards had a hugely small, limited choice of what they could do. If that wizard took a levitation spell, they didn't have something else. And most of the spell choices were in mid level range. You had between like 3 to 10 spells, maybe. So you had an easy button, but that easy button was like, it was, you had a few dollars in your pocket and you had to make sure you spent that wisely on how much ramen you got, or the dollar special at the local fast food place. Like, you really had to stretch it. Now you can swap out spells, you can regain spell levels, you can sometimes cast that spell over and over again if you wanted to, and y- it, you can default to things now. And now those, not only are was it the easy button, now the vast majority of the character classes have those very same spells they can pick for themselves. Basically, we have a magic tax. Like, no character can get away with not picking Mage Hand now. Like, Mage Hand is the default 10-foot polar spell of anything, right? You get to grab and touch and move things at a distance without having to expend a resource. Essentially, cantrips became. Um, uh, there used to be literally a single spell called cantrip, and then it turned into its own thing, and then they became zero level spells. In the beginning, they weren't even zero level spells. It was just, we need to give the wizard something to do, so let's give them the cantrip spell, which was like a combination of thaumaturgy and prestidigitation. I can't believe I pronounced that. But anyway, that was what it was in the past, and of course, we needed wizards to be able to contribute, so now they had the ability to blast things continually, and then we need to give other character classes who did the arm folding, bottom lip out, pouting, holding my breath. I don't get to do those things. And so eventually it was, we need the level dip. I want to have access to the same things. And so the line started to blur more and more between what was a spellcaster who had limited effect and what was everyone else. Now everybody's got access to it. Or you just use multiclassing to get access to it. And yeah, it was easy buttons. And so now, to limit that, for example, people forget that feats, multiclassing, um, actually every option in the game, it's actually optional. So when a player shows up at the game with their uh, level dipped wizard with some extra feats from a third party book and whatnot, and the dungeon master goes, "Nah, you can't have that," it was always optional, and we always forget to read that part of the game rules, don't we? Anyway, let's get back into our co-hosts, who are far more intelligent than I am. John Rice says it's like setting a challenging PC CRPG on story mode. It changes it from a game to a boring interactive storybook. Yeah. From a computer RPG, where if you put it on story mode, it's basically, you, you get some actions, but basically you're just being taken from story element to story scene, and that's basically the only function you have. Not that those things are bad for computer games, but when you're in front of people and you're interacting, you're having social interactions, it's kind of boring. Zamar says, I'm playing around with spellcasters not getting any true classes in a D&D light system remake. Okay, more emphasis on using what you find as a spellcaster and the need to seek out more spells. We did that back in the day. When at one point we thought about, we had a we used a spell system where the components you found along the way dictated the kind of spells you could cast. So, for example, we had a player who cut the hairs off of a giant that was slain. And so we looked through the book to find spells that dealt with giant type things, like enlarge spell and giant strength and things like that. Like, we ignored the level of the spell base. Well, we not really ignored it, but we were just like, all right, so you're third level, but this spell's much higher, but you could still cast it because you got the right components for it and such. And yeah, it was pretty interesting to try to do that. it was more fun, but it had balance issues, but we still had fun with it. So yeah, I suppose if we worked at it better, it would have been a better thing. Mm-mm. Dead Man says idea. Okay, okay, okay. When fighting a dragon, get it to eat a flask of sovereign glue and glue its mouth shut. Ah, hells yes. That's exactly what you do. That is exactly what you use that for. The dragon would have to blow its own face off to get it off because it's irremovable. Unless the dragon is very ancient and is smart enough to know that there's a universal solvent out there. But yeah, 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 that's what you do. Of course, maybe the dragon wouldn't survive that long, but you're so funny. So Mara says, I'm going to take the 2E idea of starting spells, okay, and 5E implementation of overcasting and make it so that the only way that a PC can get a new spell is one every 4 levels or take them from other wizards. Well, hey, you've already mentioned like second edition, you had to find spells. Like you didn't automatically get to learn Fireball. You, as a wizard, you had to find Fireball, write it into your spell book by spending some of that gold that you got, and then attempt to learn it. And there was a percentage chance you would never learn Fireball. People forget that you had to actually there you didn't automatically learn spells, ooh, excuse me, at all. You had a percentage chance of finding it. Um yeah, I think that's I don't know. There's so it was OSR was it wasn't harder because we're going to talk about this about monsters and adventuring and such. Um, it wasn't that death was easy in the OSR, which it was. It was that we played differently because fighting wasn't the best option all the time. It wasn't. There wasn't a computer game, video game, console element that my character will only encounter things that are balanced. And because of that, we knew that we really didn't want fighting to be the first option. We ran, we hid, we Dead Man brings up the point of using the sovereign glue and tricking a dragon into eating it. I mean, we would leave things out for monsters, we would distract them, negotiate, parlay, trick, use illusions, navigate away from, convince the big bad or whatever it was to run out of the dungeon or away from its treasure and follow a PC or a chicken or something like that down the hallway. I mean, we just played because the goal wasn't the experience. Well, first of all, you got experience points for interacting with all the monsters. You didn't have to kill them all. That just came about by reading the very first line of something and people ignored the rest of it. Much like people who ignore reading the rule about making up your own rules or getting rid of the rules, or how people ignore the rule about improvised weapons in fifth edition. They're like, well, all improvised weapons do D4. No, they don't. Most people forget you got to read the rest of it where it goes, as well as improvised weaponry, for example, that are of a similar nature to the real weapon does that damage. So we always figured if you flip a table over, it's like using a shield or using cover. If you break a chair leg off, it's basically like a club. You use a big two-handed tree branch, it's like a great club, like that kind of stuff. People don't. We often don't like to read things, which is unfortunate, or comprehend things, which is a shame. Yeah. Michael says try removing things like feats or multiclassing from a campaign. Riot ensues. I hear you. I hear you. The addiction to the easy button has become pervasive. It's become the norm now. It really has become the norm, and it's unfortunate because a lot of the trials and tribulations of being an adventurer and the challenges that we had were basically failing. You'd fail. Now the thing was, yeah, would we fail and not move forward? Yes. There were some adventures designed where if you didn't get or find a certain door or secret hatch or something, you never got the treasure that was behind it. You would never accidentally stumble upon it. It behooved us to search the rooms and move the chair and lift up the tapestry and move the rug and slide the throne to the side or something or whatever to find the little nuggets of things we wanted to progress further on in the adventure. And sometimes you just never found it. That's actually terrible. Oh, thank you, Dead Man. Thank you so much for putting that in the Discord. Which I need to bring the Discord up when I first come in. I've got high speed, and I keep forgetting that I upgraded my internet. Uh, I was having conflict issues by being live on Twitch and YouTube and Discord all at the same time. But I don't think you should have that anymore. Mm-mm-mm. Yeah. Oh, Mike says also more than one campaign intended as heroes face villains devolves into PCs fuck with NPCs' personal lives for the laughs. Yeah, try that in OSR and shit goes sideways. Yeah, yeah, stuff. We forget that balance. Yeah, like Mike says, balance is for comic books. Sharks don't care what level you are when you go swimming. Exactly. There was and the thing was, we're going to talk about this tomorrow about are OSR monsters better than modern day? Um, like were OSR monsters designed better? I would contend that that's probably not the case. I think our utilization of them was better, and much like magic items being utilized to tell a story, in classic fantasy, not fantasy, mythology, the whole point of having the Vorpal sword was to cut off the Medusa's head. It wasn't a power game, right? It was, I mean, I had a player that tried to keep a Medusa's head and use it, and we were all sitting around a table like, well, even the player was like, "Well, wait a minute, what's the rule in that?" We never had a rule. And what's strange is, like, we have lycanthropes in Dungeons and Dragons, and we never really had a codified way of portraying a character suffering through lycanthropy. We never really had a codified way of a character turning into a vampire. I mean, there's some rules, but there really has never been a codified. But that kind of stuff happens all the time. Players are always messing with stuff. Why don't we have why don't we have not rules, but why it's strange how the easy button capabilities have made those other things irrelevant, right? Like remove curse or healing someone from being poisoned or diseased is such an easy button that kind of stuff would never happen. Oh, I got bit by a werewolf. Okay, end of the round. We've killed the five werewolves. Heal, heal, heal. Fix, fix, fix. Okay, we're done. Let's go on. It's crazy. Zamar says, once again, I love bringing this up. Okay, okay, okay. Here we go. I didn't even read the comment yet. My moment in learning that 5e balance was crap was when I had a level 1 PC solo 3 bandits and a bandit captain in a straight fight with 1 health potion. Yeah. Yeah, you talk about power creep. Yeah, and we're like first level characters are fragile. Are they? Are they really? Are they? I have to say no. If you have PCs that don't have a reason to run from a fight, and I don't even mean run. Like some people think, even to today, telling a player character to back out of a fight is almost tantamount to basically telling them that my adventure is unfair. We used to back out of fights all the time, and there aren't even really good retreat rules. It's if you think about it, retreat is one of the worst options you can take in the game because it activates an opportunity attack, and it's like, what? No, it does. You know how easy it is to back out of a fight. I'm not talking about turn tailing and run. I'm saying backing out of a fight. If you're in a conflict with somebody, you take a couple of steps backwards and you put something in the way, a bar stool, another person, turn a corner. I mean, it's pretty easy to get out of a fight unless someone's got a gun. And even if they did, eh, eh, a knight, you could get out of a fight pretty easy. There aren't too much of that. But now, man, you can't even back out of a fight unless you disengage, and that takes one of your actions, and blah, blah, blah. It's weird. John Rice says, "There's no way in hell that Bilbo could fight and defeat Smaug, even with his magic short sword Sting, his mithril shirt, and the One Ring. He had to get by with other means." Exactly. So, but well, I don't want to. I don't want to flow into tomorrow. We'll talk about tomorrow and about monster interactions and morale and the OSR use of monsters more so than their design. Today, most monsters are basically a sack of hit points and a bunch of dice, and not even really good at either of those two things. Um, rather than, uh, I'm going to segue it slightly. Remember, I don't. If you guys were here, remember when I read the monsters in the role playing supplement Wagadu? If you don't know, Wagadu is a fifth edition setting, African setting, and it had monsters in the end of it. It's free. You can download it if you go to wagadu dot something. Um, but anyway, it's part of an MMO, and they wrote a setting book for it. And they decided to write the setting book in fifth edition lingo as a setting for the MMO video game, uh, console game, or whatever they're going to do it as. Anyway, long story short is that under all the monsters, they had something called an appeasement. If you brought baked goods that the undead remembered during their lifetime, you would appease them. If you brought certain kinds of sweetened fruits or something, the OSR was full of that stuff. You know, the ogre that was ravaging the town, who wanted the a couple of cows and the greatest ale that the dwarves had. You could solve that fight with some ale and cows, right? There wasn't a lot of that really isn't in fifth edition. They don't tell you like what are good ways to get past the troll that's blocking the bridge and ask for a toll to be given or something, or a great way to get past the vampire. We know some vampire limitations, but it really doesn't exist now, and I'm so upset about that. Okay, let's end this broadcast with our co-host, and we'll talk about monsters and OSR monsters and morale and some of their implementation and some of the unintended design consequences that happened from the very beginning of Dungeons and Dragons until now. But okay, Zamar says, hint, they were weaker than modern day monsters combat wise. Oh, okay. Hint, hint, hint. Yeah. Talking about player characters being like a bit weaker than being able to take on like bandits and bandit captains on their own at first level. Yeah, and don't combine a couple of PCs together. Get three or four of them together with synergy. Oh man, Death Angel. Hey, good morning there. Good morning. Mike says, my truth is this: my OSR experience defines my 5e play. I'll use spells. Um, and gear in new ways, trying to teach that to those who view the world from 5e perspectives of having it all and you can't. Yeah, and you can't. Oh, I gotta hide it. I gotta hide it to read the rest of it. You can't have it all. I'll put it back up. Um, unless it says so is challenging. Yeah, and everybody forgets the DM fiat rule when it comes to the table, and it's like, well, the DM can't tell me I can't. Actually, the rule says, if you're a rules lawyer, the rule actually says that the DM is the final arbiter. Um, like I played in a game where the DM says, basically apologized to us and was like, by the way, if you go through the cursed desert, all of your like good berry, create food and water, create water spells and things like that aren't going to work. And I was like, all right. And he's like, well, I thought I'd have to have an argument. I was like, isn't that kind of the point to have a challenge like that? It's called the accursed desert. There should be some accursedness here, right? Uh, as Amara says, for the same reason that a druid stops being affected by old age until they die. Yeah, the old age rules went away. That was an wow. Isn't that a throwback um, vector of harm being aged out of existence? I forgot about that. Pre 5e PCs are fragile. Yeah, Death Angel says 5e PCs are superheroes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they are. They are. I think there's a middle ground to it, in terms of allowing player characters to keep surviving, but we just don't have a consequence effect in fifth edition, and that's a shame. Indie games have consequences. Um, Fate uses it. Powered by the Apocalypse uses it. Blades in the Dark uses it, where you're you still fail forward, but you start developing stacked consequences rather than just straight up death. And I think there are ways we can do this without having to be like you're dead. Mm-mm. Um, Z says, I found that if your NPCs are not out for blood, they won't there won't be a chance hurting themselves in trying to take you down. They want to live too. That's another thing about morale. We're going to get into that tomorrow. Like monsters wanted to live, and one of the worst things was for monsters to run and then come back again later on. We've had monsters basically level up in games in the OSR. It was pretty daunting. We had a an ogre magi. Today they're called Oni that end up gaining more magic items and other allies and stuff. We didn't defeat him. And he turned into gaseous form and left. And man, that character just NPC kept coming back. Uh oh. Mike's like, don't get me started on monsters are only their stat blocks nonsense. They're more than that. It's so crazy how yeah. Unintended design consequences by trying to turn monsters into hit point sponges, and it's like, no, they're more than that. I love it. I love it. Z says, plus you never back someone into a corner. That's when you learn how powerful they really are. That's when your PC should go supernova. Yeah. Yeah. There's something that's done in, I think it's Dungeon World or no, I think it's Dungeon World. Um, we might talk about for monsters tomorrow. Um, Death Angel says my players just drank with the enemies and wound up talking their way past them. That's a cool thing too, right? That's a really cool thing. Oh man. Mm-mm-mm. Oh my god. That's funny. Like og nog niche. Gadu Chronicles. Thank you there, Dead Man, who's always there with the information. Damn, you always on point. Um, mm, 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 mm. Let's see example. This very weekend, we had a dragon encounter. We got by it because of flattery, offerings, and social interactions. Not I cast fireball. You can deal with foes outside of roll initiative, and essentially, there's a weird default in players today that if an encounter is unbalanced, it mechanically that it's unfair. The whole point was that if it was balanced, if first level characters ever encountered something more powerful than them, you would do what you would do with a powerful enemy. You would flatter them, you would convince them, you would try to run away, you would beseech them not to kill you. Maybe that encounter would never even become combat related because that dragon would just walk right or fly right past you. It wasn't automatic combat. It was just here's a powerful enemy and you know you can't defeat it, and what are you going to do? And you're like, I'm going to hide from the dragon flying overhead. Okay, great. Now you know there's a blue dragon flying across the accursed desert, right? That was the point. Yeah, and I have to say this about everybody. Mike's like Z, clear you're not the typical 5e player. Apologies for any offense. Listen, none of you guys are actually. It's so hilarious because I think some of us are underserved because you guys are a different level of creators and players and interactors in the game world. And I don't understand why we don't just today. I'm not talking about any other broadcast on this show. I'm just talking today, like how much brilliance do we have just amongst ourselves? I don't understand why this hasn't seeped into. Maybe it's just social media is, when you're confined to 280 characters or everyone's trying to hit the burn. um or the memes that are very reductivist when clearly we have people who have far greater capabilities and imaginations and just just energy in the gaming world. It's weird. Yeah, like Death Angel said, maybe it's a video game mentality. There's a bit of that too, where there's automatically balance. You're automatically assumed to, if you play reasonably well, succeed. Um, Hell, if even if you don't succeed, you get to start over again, over and over. Thank you very much, Dead Man, for bringing up, for popping in the link to the Wagadu Chronicles. The that's the free supplement that has the really interesting monsters at the back end of it, along with the setting. I mean, listen, I'm a fan of it. That's why I did it for Black History Month. But in addition to that, there's also the idea of like these monsters that had these appeasement levels in them, and it tells a story as to like, appeasing some kind of undead spirit by baking its favorite food is a great idea, and it's not really a mechanical thing. That's a role playing thing, and I love it. Death Angels is uh, clarifying the video game mentality. I think a lot of that happens to be due to mindset. Newer players are often of the mindset that they should have to eliminate the opponent instead of finding alternative solutions. I mean, like I read yesterday from 1995, like um, from 1995, talking about how experience points were given out, and the very first blurb talks about eliminating your enemies, and the whole rest of the paragraph talks about experience points given out for literally perceived threats, not even real threats, but like perceived threats. Experience points given out for avoiding monsters, for parlaying with them, for tricking them, like putting them to sleep, or trapping them behind a cave in or something, like all those things. And that was written in the rules almost 30 years ago. 1995, that's almost 30 years ago. Yeah, it's crazy. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Samara, you will ambush them and hobble their kneecaps before gloating over their slowly bleeding corpses, stealing their armor weapons. I played a kobold for too long. Kobolds, ooh, they're awesome. Yeah, 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 yeah. Samara says, then you know the power of bringing down powerful foes and saving your frenemies with traps. You guys are funny. Yeah. So, guys, anyway, thank you there, Mike, and everybody else. Thank you very, very much for being part of the stream and bringing your absolute best. That's why I hire you guys as co-hosts. You get paid as much as I do. Nothing. But we do get a lot out of it. We get a chance to just have some fun, do some things. Tomorrow we're going to talk about monsters and OSR versus 5e monsters. Stat blocks, that has something to do with it. Implementation has a lot to do with it. We had much fewer monsters back in the day than today, but I think we got a lot more out of them. Um, there's a strange design element, and I know why it exists because it's a money issue. Of back in the day, we used to have one. If we had a page devoted to one monster, you had like five or six modifications of it down there. Now, you get a. I'm just going to make something up. You get an orc or an orc captain, and then you have to buy another book to get the orc berserker, and then another book has three more orcs in it. And I'm just like, it's all you're doing is just modifying some numbers. You could have like 15 different types of orc hordes in on one page. You don't need a whole different separate book for all that. But anyway, it's a money thing. It's monster books. Player options are one thing. Monster books are a whole big other thing. And you can reskin, reuse, reflavor monsters for infinity without having to buy new monster books. And people don't. I love the art, but yeah, I don't. I'm not really a monster book buyer because I know the secret. Had not added today as a co-host, got enough gold for it. Oh, okay. Well, listen, if you're sitting on your pile of gold, you do that. Greedmeister there, Drudenfizz. Oh Oh wow. Mike's like defeated a wyvern by animating a bag of tiny wooden toys. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Funny. Called it 40 minutes on the dot. Guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for being part of the show. I got to go. Got to head off to work, but we'll be here bright and early, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, comment afterwards, participate. All the BS that you weren't able to put in the show today. Just remember, we try to do this all week long, so save up all that flavor for tomorrow. So, guys, thank you very much. I'm gonna have to make an outro video or something like that because I still got Dungeons and Dragons in it. But anyway, guys, have a great one. I will see you later. Peace.